Devon Miller's life was shattered by a wrongful conviction. But his story is not one of defeat, it's a powerful journey of resilience, hope, and transformation. I was 19 when it happened. Just a kid with a chip on his shoulder and no real idea of who he was, or what he could become. I woke up that morning with a pounding headache and a sense that something wasn't right. That sixth sense you get when you grow up around sirens, broken windows, and whispered threats behind locked doors. I was living on the east side of Houston back then, not the part you see in postcards. My mom worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on. My dad, he left when I was 8. Said he was going to get milk. He never came back. I spent most of my time with my cousin Ray. He was older, smarter in some ways, dumber in others. He had connections and he liked to act like he ran things. That day he asked me to come with him to pick up some stuff. Just a quick stop, he said, tossing me the keys to his old Chevy. 10 minutes, tops. 12? I joked, sliding into the driver's seat. I need a burger after. I remember the sun hitting my face as I pulled into that gas station lot. I remember the woman behind the counter, her red nails, her shaking hands. I remember the gunshots, 3 of them, and then Ray running out, screaming at me to go. What the hell did you do? I yelled, heart pounding. Drive, he shouted, slamming the door behind him. I drove, not because I knew what happened. Not because I was guilty, but because fear makes you stupid, and when your cousin is bleeding and yelling, you don't stop to ask questions. We didn't get far. Cops blocked us 3 blocks away. I was arrested on the spot. Armed robbery and attempted murder, the officer said, tightening the cuffs around my wrists. I didn't do anything, I muttered. But they didn't hear me. Or maybe they just didn't care. They kept me in county jail for 11 months before the trial even started. 11 months. That's almost a year of cold metal bunks, tasteless food, and fluorescent lights that never go off. My cellmate was a man named Jerome. He'd already been in and out of prison so many times he joked they should give him a frequent flyer card. You better get your mind right, kid, he told me the second night. If you're waiting on justice, you already lost. I didn't believe him that I still thought the truth mattered. I kept thinking, once they hear what happened, once I tell my side, they'll let me go. I didn't pull the trigger that I didn't even know Ray had a gun. But Ray disappeared. Vanished. They said he skipped town. They couldn't find him, couldn't charge him. All they had was me. And I had nothing. My public defender barely spoke to me. I saw him maybe 3 times before the trial. Each time he looked more exhausted than the last. This is gonna be tough, he told me once, glancing at his watch. You were at the scene. You drove the car. They're calling it felony murder. Look, I'll try for a deal. I didn't do it, I said. I didn't even know what he was planning. He sighed like I'd said something childish. Intent doesn't matter. Not in Texas. Not with your record. What record? I snapped. He looked up, finally meeting my eyes. You got caught with weed twice. And your cousin has priors. That's enough. The courtroom was a formality. A stage. The prosecutor painted me as a cold-blooded accomplice. They showed grainy footage of me pulling up in the car. They replayed it over and over like it was a confession. The clerk called my name. I stood. Devon Miller, you are hereby found guilty of felony murder and aggravated robbery. You are sentenced to 25 years in prison. My knees buckled. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just remember looking at my mother. Her hand was over her mouth. She shook her head like if she shook hard enough, this nightmare would end. But it didn't. That was the beginning. Not of my sentence, but of who I would become. The bus ride to the state penitentiary was quiet, except for the sound of chains. They shackled my wrists, ankles, and waist like I was some kind of monster. Like I hadn't already lost everything. I stared out the tiny window as the city disappeared behind us. That was the last time I saw Houston for over a decade. The moment those prison gates closed behind me, I felt it, the weight of a world that no longer cared who I was. The guards didn't see a person. They saw a number. Number 127846. That was my name now. The first night I was placed in a cell with a guy named Marcus. He was in for armed robbery, second time. Tattoos all up his neck, missing a front tooth, and eyes that didn't blink much. He looked me over and smirked. You ain't gonna last here, rookie. I said nothing. You soft, he added. Better figure out quick what you're willing to fight for. I didn't sleep that night, I couldn't. The noise never stopped, yelling, metal clanging, someone crying in the next block like their soul had been ripped out. Weeks passed, then months. I got jumped twice, once in the shower, once in the yard. My ribs were bruised. My spirit shattered. The worst part wasn't the beatings. It was the loneliness, the silence from the outside world. My mom stopped visiting after the second year. Said it was too hard to see me like that. I understood, but it still felt like dying slowly. I almost gave up. I remember sitting on the edge of my bunk, looking at the razor a guy had smuggled in from the kitchen. One thought looped in my head: if I'm not a person anymore, then what am I? And then one day something changed. I was working in the library. It was the only job they'd let me have, cleaning shelves, sorting old books nobody touched. I found a torn-up copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X. I sat on the cold floor and read it cover to cover. And when I finished, I read it again. And again. For the first time, something stirred inside me. Malcolm had been to prison. And he didn't just survive, he transformed. He used words like weapons. Knowledge like armor. That night, I whispered to myself in the dark, they took my freedom. But I'll be damned if they take my mind. After reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, I couldn't go back to being numb. Every day after work, I stayed in the library. I read everything I could get my hands on: history, politics, psychology, even the prison code of conduct. I didn't know what I was looking for yet. But I knew I was hungry for something bigger than survival. The prison librarian, Miss Clayton, was an older black woman who wore her glasses on a beaded chain and walked like she had all the time in the world. "You keep showing up," she said one day, eyeing the stack of books in my arms. "I'm trying to figure out who I am," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment, then handed me a book on constitutional law. "Start here." At first, it felt like trying to read a different language. Legal terms blurred together. My brain ached. But I kept going. I underlined everything. I wrote notes on scraps of paper. And when I couldn't understand something, I asked questions. Miss Clayton started calling me Professor. "You know," she said once, "you're not just learning this for yourself. You could help others in here. Guys get railroaded all the time. Nobody tells them their rights." That stuck with me. So I started helping. It began with simple things: writing letters, reading court transcripts, explaining how appeals worked. Word spread. Guys from different blocks started showing up at the library asking, "Hey, you the one who knows the law?" I was still scared every day, still watching my back. But something had shifted. For the first time in years, I felt useful. Then came Jamal. He was 23, doing 15 years for a crime he swore he didn't commit. Said they pinned it on him because he didn't have a decent lawyer. "I didn't even know I could appeal," he said, staring at the floor. "They just told me to sign the deal." I spent weeks going through his file. It was messy. The DA had withheld evidence. Witnesses hadn't been interviewed. I helped Jamal draft an appeal and walked him through the process. 6 months later, he got his sentence overturned. He cried in the yard the day they let him out. Hugged me like a brother. "You saved my life, man," he whispered. That night, I stared at the ceiling in my cell for hours. My chest was tight, but not from pain, from purpose. I wasn't just learning anymore. I was becoming. Jamal's release lit a fire in the prison. Guys started lining up at the library with paperwork, desperate eyes, and stacks of old trial transcripts. I helped as many as I could, but deep down, something gnawed at me. What about me? I had spent years learning the law. I'd read more court cases than most first-year law students. I had helped 3 men walk free. But I was still caged. One night, after lights out, I sat on the floor of my cell and pulled out my trial transcript. I'd read it dozens of times over the years, but this time I read it like a stranger. Like a lawyer. That's when I saw it. The prosecution's key witness, a gas station attendant, had changed her story. Between her initial statement and the one she gave on the stand, 2 critical details shifted. Back then, I didn't notice. My lawyer didn't point it out. But now it looked like perjury. I spent 3 weeks drafting a habeas corpus petition. Citing the altered testimony, my poor legal representation, and the disappearance of my cousin Ray, I built a case from the inside out. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have money. I had truth. And that had to be enough. I mailed the documents myself, wrapped in an old manila envelope, hands shaking like I was sending my whole soul through the mail. For months, nothing. Then one afternoon, a guard called my name. "Miller. Legal mail." I opened it in the library, surrounded by paperbacks and silence. A federal judge had reviewed my petition. He was granting me a hearing. A real chance. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. When the day came, I stood in front of the court in shackles again, but this time, I held my own file in my hands. I represented myself. I recited legal precedent. I challenged the credibility of the prosecution's witness. I told the truth, calmly, clearly, without begging. When I finished, the judge just stared at me. Then he spoke. "Mr. Miller, where did you study law?" I paused. In here, I said softly. Cell block C. He didn't smile, but his eyes changed. A month later the ruling came down, conviction vacated. Charges dropped. Devon Miller to be released immediately. I stood in the yard that morning holding a plastic bag with all my belongings. It wasn't much, but it was mine. A CO opened the gate. "Don't come back," he muttered. I stepped outside. The sun hit different when you hadn't felt it in 12 years. I always thought getting out would be the hard part. I was wrong. Freedom doesn't come with instructions. When I stepped outside those gates, I thought I'd feel pure joy. But what I felt was small, like the world had grown too fast while I was stuck in slow motion. I didn't know how to use a smartphone. I hadn't touched the internet in over a decade. I didn't have a bank account, a job, or even clothes that fit. People looked at me like I just crawled out of a cave. And in some ways, I had. I slept on my aunt's couch for 6 months. Every job interview ended the same way. "Do you have a criminal record?" It was overturned. I was innocent. Still. "We're looking for someone with a clean background." Rejection started to feel like routine. But I remembered Jamal. I remembered the men I'd helped on the inside. I remembered that version of myself, sitting in a prison cell, reading law books by flashlight, dreaming of something more. I applied to law school. It felt like a long shot. I wrote an essay so raw I cried 3 times while typing it. I told them everything. The false conviction, the trial, the years behind bars, the library, the self-education, the hearing. I ended it with one line: "I don't want revenge, I want to protect others from what happened to me." 6 months later I got the letter. Accepted. I was the only formerly incarcerated student in my class. People looked at me funny when I said where I came from, but no one could question why I was there. I graduated near the top of my class. Passed the bar on my first try. Today I stand in courtrooms where I was once condemned, only now I speak for the silenced. I represent clients who can't afford lawyers. I fight wrongful convictions. I visit prisons and teach inmates how to advocate for themselves. I run a nonprofit called Second Wind, for people who were buried alive by the justice system and somehow, against all odds, clawed their way back up. Sometimes people ask me if I hate the system. I don't. I fear it. I respect its power. And I know exactly how broken it is. But hate? No. Hate would have made me a prisoner forever. Instead, I chose purpose. I chose to become the kind of man I never saw coming when I was 19, the kind of man who walked into hell and walked back out holding light. And I'm never putting it down.